Yo,
What's going on, man?
not much. Just ready to get into this.
Yes, sir. Well, everybody, welcome to this special edition of Must Love Wrestling as we pay tribute to one of the greatest minds and overall most beautiful human being in professional wrestling, Windham Rotunda, also known to many as Bray Wyatt. Tyler, you said you wanted to kick us off, so go for it.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a eulogy for Bray yesterday. So
Yes,
let's
sir.
start by reading that. It's been said many times when someone is taken before we believe they should be, that special people are only here for a short time. I don't know if that's true, but what I do know is the truly gifted among us seem to burn brightly as long as they can bear before passing on to the next life to share their gifts there. Everyone has different beliefs about what that might look like, and this isn't the place to debate those beliefs. We're here to honor a man who gave everything he had to entertain us, right until the very end. I didn't know Windham Rotunda, better known as Bray Wyatt. I never met him, even though he only lived about an hour and a half from me. I regret that now, not just because I was a big fan of his work, but because of the incredible man that all his friends and colleagues seem to describe in the tributes they posted since Thursday. Everyone says nice things when someone passes. After all, it's disrespectful to speak ill of the dead. However, rarely have I seen someone pass where I've seen so many specific examples about what made that person special to those around him. I'm not going to list them here, but there are many beautiful posts in wrestling social media if you'd like to seek them out. All of that is before taking into account what made this man special to us, his truly brilliant and unparalleled mind when it came to the wrestling business. I was captivated when I saw Bray Wyatt on my TV for the first time, but even I forgot the creativity that went into his promos and vignettes. Going back to watch them, it's amazing that even 9 or 10 years later, they're still mesmerizing, and no one has matched the level of storytelling that Bray managed to work into his promos. I think we'll be talking about them for years to come as a standard of how to tell stories in this business. Ultimately, Windham Rotunda's heart was too full for this world, and because of that, he left us this past Thursday. However, in just 36 years, he left us with a lifetime of memories. Our hearts and prayers go out to his family. We'd like to take the time with this episode to truly honor a truly special man. So for one last time, hit the lights and blow out the lantern. We're here.
That was awesome, man. That was great. I appreciate the thought and the care that you took to go into that and to make a eulogy for someone like Bray. He definitely deserves it. He has definitely touched so many people. I gotta say, one of the reasons that he sticks out to me is because, as I've mentioned to you before, Bray has always been a way to have communication. I know that sounds really silly and dumb, but to someone like me who didn't really grow up with a lot of people, I was kind of sent here to this country, and I was kind of sent here to this country and didn't have anybody, just kind of had my dad and my stepmom. I met my best friend Patrick, and we kind of had our interaction, but for the most part, I was very alone. And I don't know when you and I became friends and stuff. Once I realized that an easy way to have a conversation with you was through kind of poking the bear a little bit.
To insult someone I love, yeah.
Yeah, so I would send you little clips or send you little things about things said about Bray Wyatt, about his in-ring ability and things like that. And for the most part, I genuinely felt like I wish there was something that could change. But once I realized, I was like, man, I can go like weeks with talking with no one. But if I send Tyler a shitty little comment about Bray or something that somebody says about Bray, immediately I'm going to have somebody to talk to. We're going to be able to talk and, interact with each other. I'll never forget the one conversation that spurned over a couple of days was after Seth Rollins made the comment that nobody comes out of a feud with Bray a winner and how he said only Brian does. I took that as an opportunity, one, to dig a little into Bray, but at the same time to prop up Brian because that's my guy. And I just remember that conversation was days of us just like talking to each other about this. And, you know, he's definitely meant a lot to me over the years just based on that. And I've always tried to make him like my Adam Cole, where I've just kind of gone back and tried to figure out ways to like him. And that's when which as Tyler can attest, I most recently changed my tune on the Buzzards character, where I started talking about like, this is the best version of Bray. This is like the best storytelling. And I went from being not a fan of this man's work at all to slowly but surely being able to call him one of the best minds in professional wrestling and saying that he can give us a beautiful story. And then just because it would be disingenuous of me to just start there, I would make sure to point out that like, yes, but then ultimately the matches were kind of a letdown. But either way, you have to appreciate what he means to professional wrestling. And I am one of those people, as Tyler can attest to as well. Once I find out you're a kind soul in real life, so, you know, it's really hard for me to root against you as a pro wrestler. And I mean, as we're seeing with Gunther, yeah, Bray is one of those special people. He's definitely gone too soon. And, you know, we want to be able to give him a proper tribute show that that the company he worked for was not able to give him. He definitely does.
Like since Thursday, I've gone back and watched some of the early promos with the Wyatt family, the Eater of Worlds character, and it's just honestly, I've never seen anything better as far as that type of thing goes. Mm-hmm. He did one. It's called Miss Teacher Lady, where he talks about this teacher who. This was leading up, I believe, to the cage match with John Cena. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I had this teacher, and she looked down on all of us when we were kids. And I asked her one day, Miss Teacher Lady, what makes you think you're better than us just because your parents paid for you to go to this fancy college and get this degree? She said, Bray Wyatt, you're rotten to the core. He said, but now I take comfort in knowing that teacher lady, she's in a retirement home and she has nothing, and I've got the whole world. And at the beginning of the promo, they were, you know, wutting him because our audience now are conditioned for catchphrases, not nuanced storytelling. But by the end of the promo, they're all standing and clapping and singing his song.
Yeah.
That's the power that he had. He could transform a what chant to literally having the whole world in his hands.
Yes. That is very true. I mean, he definitely had this. He had this connection. I mean, you can see it when he. You can see it when he. In pretty much like you said, in any promo he's ever cut, it is definitely like a special. I don't know how to say it. It's a special connection that only few people have with pro wrestling. And you can kind of see it with his, I don't know how to say it. I feel so flabbergasted based on I just keep seeing him in the ring cutting these promos, but you can see when he goes out there that the crowd is genuinely invested. Like they stop what they're doing. And it's very, as I said, very few people that can actually connect this way with a live audience. I mean, we've seen it with The Rock. We've seen it with Austin. We've seen it with Brian. We've seen it with, most recently, LA Knight. If you realize, we've seen it with Cody. If you pay attention to these guys and just stop what you're doing, watch the television, just fix your ears to the TV, you can see that they don't get the what chance. They don't get that. People just genuinely listen to what these guys have to say.
I think in his case, it was because you knew you were going to get something completely different from everything else you're seeing on the show. As one of the things in the video tribute that they gave him was, he says, in a world of black and white, I'm the color red, or something to that effect. And that's like 100% perfect description.
Yes.
He is entirely different than every other thing on the show. And that to me, it was part of his wrestling too. So while some people might have thought he was not good, to me, it was different. It was unorthodox, and it maybe not what a lot of people liked, but I don't know. I liked it and I appreciated it because it was not the same thing as I'm seeing in every other match.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely am not going to sit here and pretend like I was a big fan of his matches, because I just genuinely wasn't. I always felt like it was as I compared it to Tyler before, it was like dating someone and then finding out when you like ultimately had that first kiss with them that there was no real connection. And you're just like, oh, okay. Well, I guess we could walk our separate ways now. Like, that's kind of what I felt like, because I just felt like he was never given the opportunity. And then over time, we recently found out through rumors and dirt sheets, which, you know, we don't know what to take, if we should take it with a grain of salt or if any of it's true, but we've recently found out that there was a lot of things that were forced on Bray in terms of creative control. Like, he never wanted to wrestle in these lights, but
who would?
Yeah, and these people that ran the back thought this was a good idea. And it didn't matter how many times people berated or people were angry at these lights. And ultimately, I think when we look back at Bray Wyatt's career in 5-10 years, I believe that he will be on these lists of wrestlers that didn't get to the spot they were going to be in. And it's all because of those light matches, because every time we got to those matches, we don't even know if they're good. Because I went back and I watched 2 Seth Rollins matches because I wanted to prepare myself to be properly able to dissect his career for a little bit here. And we're not going to do like a wrestler spotlight. We're just going to pay tribute. This isn't going to be like a 2-hour episode or anything, but I wanted to really soak in the Bray, you know, like just kind of like really soak in what he means. So I went back and I watched some Husky Harris stuff, some Bray Wyatt stuff. You know, I wanted to listen to his promos. And what I realized is I have been wrong about Bray for a decent amount of time. When he beats Seth Rollins for the Universal Championship, that match, the win, that match, even though it's in red light, that match is pretty good. But the Hell in the Cell, that match is awful. I think both of those men did not want to be in there. Like,
well, Seth has spoken out and said that he hated the finish and that he felt like they could have done better, and that they were booked into a corner. So I think I've told the story before, but like partway through that match, I was really enjoying it, and I was like, all right, here we go. Because like Seth's doing everything to kill this larger than life character, the Fiend, that just can't be put down. And they're really telling a story and having a good match. And then somewhere in there it went off the rails, and then they had that just awful finish. And the red light did no favors for them. But I think they both realized that they were kind of being put in a position that they could not succeed in.
Yes.
And so therefore it kind of fell flat. But yeah, like you said, the Falls Count Anywhere match where Bray wins the title, I think is really good. I think the match that he beats Strowman for the title is, I don't know if I would say good, like technically good, but it was fun.
I will say, and this has happened to me also with wrestlers that I've liked in the past. When a wrestler you love or even like tends to have a monumental win at a pay-per-view or even a Raw, it turns out that you alone think that match is better than it actually is.
It could be.
Like my perfect example of one of my favorite matches I've ever seen. And I've gone back and watched it and thought to myself, wow, this match for these two being so talented, it's actually kind of mid. Not to use like new school terminology, but that's the best way I could put it, is I went back and watched Sting versus Scott Hall for the WCW World Title. And when I watched this match, I'm actually pretty upset by the fact that I was a kid and thought this was a good match. Like, it was one of those just, it didn't feel like either one was actually there. Like, it felt like it was just a job to them instead of something that they loved. But when I was a kid, I loved Sting. I mean, we wouldn't have this podcast right now together. Me and Tyler wouldn't be friends because without Sting, I'm not a fan of pro wrestling. And to be honest with you, that match is actually not good. It's not.
It's like as growing up, I love the Undertaker Yokozuna match from the casket match from the Rumble, and I still love it in a nostalgic way. But like, I've watched it since, and I'm just like, this is really bad.
Well, it's really hard because Yoko's doing everything he can, and then he's just in there with like this green guy who's just not very good. So, like, I mean, if Yoko had a little more help, the match is probably better. But unfortunately, he's in there with this guy who doesn't know how to wrestle yet. He didn't really learn how to wrestle until his first Hell in the Cell match. So he was really just doing these terrible moves. I mean, if I feel bad for Yoko to be put in that position.
Yeah, he had mostly worked with just Taker had mostly worked with just big guys by that point, so he hadn't been really having matches, more spectacles, but yeah.
But yeah, getting back to Bray. Getting back to Bray, I want to say to you, you know, it's very hard for a guy like Bray Wyatt to get over. You know, it doesn't always work. We have had really successful second and third generation superstars, such as Dusty's kids, his biological kids, not the NXT kids. Like Dustin, the natural, successful wrestler, mid-carder for life, but amazing. Cody, another one, successful. Randy Orton, another one, successful. But what Bray was able to do was he was able to go from a Scott Putski to a Randy Orton in just 10 years. And what I mean by that is, the reason I say Randy Orton is because I can't think of any that are third generation superstars. And Randy and Windham are third generation superstars. Their grandfathers wrestled, their fathers wrestled, and then they wrestled. And they were able to do something that neither their father nor their grandfathers were able to do. And they were both WWE World Champions, which is something that I think it's unprecedented, because can you even imagine the fact that like IRS, Erwin R. Shyster, he never wins the World Heavyweight Championship. He doesn't always wrestle as IRS. Like Mike Rotunda was a really good worker. I think by the time he gets put in Money Incorporated, he's just kind of like, he's just not there anymore.
Well, when you're playing that character, you're there to get a paycheck. Like,
yes. And then Blackjack Mulligan, who's also was also a really solid old school wrestler from back in the day. And then you obviously his uncles, Barry and Kendall
Right,
Windham.
exactly.
Barry Windham. There are people in wrestling, and I mean this wholeheartedly. There are people in professional wrestling that have gone out of their way to remind the world how fucking good Barry Windham was. I knew as a child how good Barry Windham was. That is a lot of pressure for a guy like Bray. And he comes into NXT, the first group of NXT talent, and he comes in as Husky Harris, because as we know from Fang McFrost or Lloyd Bonaire, as these terrible wrestling names that were provided to legends of the sport like Stone Cold Steve Austin and Bryan Danielson, that Vince McMahon just had his creative control, or the people that he had in creative, they looked at wrestling names as comical. Like Husky Harris.
Creative services, yes.
Yeah, like Husky Harris. I think Husky Harris will go down as one of the worst names ever. I always thought to myself,
as Conrad Thompson would say, who booked this shit?
Yeah. Like when I listen to like people say it, I always thought like I always try to make the argument that Lloyd Bonaire is the worst wrestling name I've ever heard.
Is that in his book? Because I missed it.
He says that was a part of the names. And then he was like, let me just switch my names, Daniel Bryan.
I don't remember that. That's crazy. That's awful.
Yeah.
That's probably the worst, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think it's really interesting. He was able to go from this Husky Harris to essentially getting rid of the character altogether, and then having this group that just, I mean, I just want to make this clear. The initial group was 5 people, and they wound up with 3. Summer Rae was the original Sister Abigail.
Ooh,
I don't think people know that.
Interesting.
And then Victor from Wish LOD. Remember Victor?
Yeah.
He was in the original Wyatt family, along with Luke Harper and Eric Rowan. Those were the 5. There's actual vignettes of, you can go out and you can see like Bray laughing, sitting on his rocking chair with Summer Rae like on her knees, almost looking like a feral child.
I didn't really recognize the people, but I've seen them with more than what he has.
Now, obviously, we're going to touch on the people that he worked best with. We're not going to ignore that because they definitely helped prop up his career. But right away from the beginning, you could tell the Wyatt family was going to be something big, and they've had feuds with the Shield. They've had feuds with the Brothers of Destruction, and you can see that the way people talk about the Shield nowadays, they could have talked about the Wyatt family, but I felt like, and I don't mean to be negative on this podcast because we're supposed to be, spewing positivity, but it felt like they were more so treated like, we're going to use you guys to help get these guys over.
Other people over, yeah.
Instead of using them as like, hey, like John Cena and Batista, instead of being like, hey, we got Roman. We got this guy Roman. But what if Bray follows his career? What if it's Roman and Bray for the next 10 years and they always make their way back to each other?
Right. The thing is, I think that that Bray especially was over no matter what he did, no matter how many times he lost.
Yes.
Because God knows he lost. So I think they saw that and they're like, all right, well, we can use you to put over other people because you're over just based on your character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those trios matches with the Shield are just
they're solid encounters. I definitely think that could have been like a lifetime feud. We would be thinking about, I felt like they were a blip. Like the best way to put it is the impact of those feuds will resonate the way CM Punk versus John Cena resonates. It's a short amount of time, and the feud was so good that we'll always look at it. But ultimately, when it's dissected, the first question that will pop into your mind is, why did they only have this like year stint? Where was the longevity?
Well, the Shield broke up.
Yes, but like you can still have a feud with a certain individual. And it was clear that Bray was the guy for the Wyatt family. And it was clear that Roman was the guy for the Shield.
And they did have a feud.
Yeah, but it was never really pushed forward. I felt like I've most recently said about Ricky Starks and MJF. I feel like Bray being as good as he is, as good as he was on the microphone, as good as he was a character, the way he resonated with audiences, they kind of had to pull him away from Roman. Because, you keep him with Roman, he's going to be the guy that gets over, and Roman's not going to ever get to that spot. They needed Roman to work guys like Baron Corbin. They needed Roman to work guys like Sheamus with the stupid haircut. They needed those versions to get Roman to the spot they wanted him to be and work Triple H, like guys that fans are preconditioned to hate. But Bray didn't need that. Bray was such a special talent, but I want to move on to your feelings when Bray Wyatt, like, what feud do you feel like will define Bray Wyatt's career? Because if I could just point some out real quick, most notably, he has his feud with The Shield. That's his group. But as a single superstar, he has his feud with Bryan. He has his feud with Randy Orton. He has his feud with Roman Reigns, and he has his feud with Finn Balor. Those are his 4 biggest feuds of his career. Which do you think out of those 4 will define Bray Wyatt's career, that when people go back, they will look at it and be like, that was it?
I think, unfortunately, they're going to look to the 2 feuds with Orton. And it's unfortunate.
Are you saying unfortunate because he didn't win those feuds?
No, I'm saying unfortunate because of, like, the WrestleMania match where they were projecting things onto the canvas and some of the other hokey bullshit that we're doing that didn't work. Whereas I think in the other ones, he was just allowed to be more of himself. And I think the Bryan feud is his best. They tell a really good story, and it gets them to a great place, and that's one that did certainly elevate his opposition. Because Bryan comes out of that he was already on fire, but just like rocket to the moon.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right, because Bryan loses that feud. Bray wins that feud, right? They actually have multiple matches where Bray always comes out on top. Bryan is he's very much one of those guys that winning and losses don't matter to his character or career. He's one of those very special Shawn Michaels type talents, Seth Rollins, The Miz. There's just like 4 guys those are the 4 guys that I think of that can lose feuds and it doesn't hurt them at all. Like, they're just another level. I'm sorry that to some of you fragile people that I put The Miz in there, but The Miz is one of those people, guys. He can lose a feud and still come out a winner. So calm down. But getting back to it, there's a part of me that wanted to add the John Cena feud, but I can't do it because we have agreed that WrestleMania 30 match is actually it was essentially Finn Balor's broken arm.
Right.
That's how I look at that feud. I know people don't agree with it, but John Cena himself has said this. If you go back and you watch the Daniel Bryan special, the SSS special, Cena talks about how people say he's got this mythical golden shovel. And what he says in there is that he will elevate the talent. They're up here with him. And then when they're done with him, they just fall. There are some guys that rise, and then some guys will just not be able to stay in that spot. And when I look at...
It's just not true, though.
Well, we're not talking about Cena. We can spotlight Cena another day.
You don't make them look credible, then they can't. But anyway, that's fine.
So we're looking at, like, John says this, and I always thought to myself that he was right in the sense that, like, yeah, like, here it goes. Because if you go back and you look at from WrestleMania to WrestleMania 31, Bray is kind of sprinkled into wrestling. He has a couple of matches here and there, but I mean, think about it. Right now, as we're doing this podcast, think about WrestleMania to WrestleMania 31. The only matches you could think of are the headline matches.
Yeah, he has a feud with he comes out of the Cena feud and feuds with Jericho.
Good Chris Jericho.
Right, and they had good matches.
Mm-hmm.
He did get hurt in there because he was supposed to feud. He was supposed to face Brock at Mania.
Mm-hmm.
He got hurt in there. He had the Roman Reigns feud in between. No, it would have been after the Roman Reigns feud was summer of 15 because I actually just watched he was doing a sit down with Michael Cole, which was incredible. How he talks about how he has to take out Roman Reigns and why.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, when you look at it, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. That WrestleMania 30 loss to Taker never needed to happen. And it is, and I will stand on this. I don't know whether you call me a mark or whether you will actually try to put yourself in my perspective, like listen to my perspective. I think that if Taker never gets injured and has such a poor match with Lesnar at WrestleMania 30, I think Taker starts giving back to the company. I don't think he wins the next year at Mania, but I think he left such a stink at WrestleMania that they were like, we got to get it out there. And they made it a big deal about him not feeling like himself. I mean, you can see the specials and stuff like that. And I just feel like those really hurt Bray Wyatt.
There were a lot of problems with that match, one of which was the fact that it took place during the daytime.
Yes. There are a lot of people that talk about that WrestleMania as whoever booked the card didn't properly book the card because there's two matches on that entire card that when people talk about WrestleMania 31, they talk about it as these two matches should have been at nighttime. And there's the Sting versus Triple H match and the Bray Wyatt versus Undertaker match.
Can you imagine that match if it's just like Twilight? It's just getting dark as they're both these spooky characters are making their entrances.
Yes,
and it's the time of day. It's like the gloaming. It's the time of day that we're taught to fear when daylight turns to dark.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just imagine the atmosphere?
You know, I want to say something.
It's not that hard, guys. Come on.
Yeah, I want to say something, and I know this is going to sound really disingenuous, but I want you guys to hear me out, and hopefully you can just follow me for a quick second. So please follow it. Follow the buzzards here for a second. I am upset when I think about what could have been, because when I look at a pro wrestler in my era, in my lifetime, that is all about putting over talent, I wonder to myself, how can nobody have booked Bray Wyatt versus Sting? I can see that feud being what Vampiro and Sting was supposed to be. The promos, the style, the things that Sting would have been able to do, and ultimately Sting putting over Bray in a moment like a WrestleMania, what it would have done for someone like Bray Wyatt. Because
would have been really
there's a really great comp to Bray Wyatt. I know a lot of people like to look at Bray and say, oh, that's Foley. He looks just like Foley. I'm sorry, guys. Two chubby white guys with a beard, just because they look alike, they're not the same wrestler. Bray Wyatt and Mick Foley are not the same wrestler. But if I could think of one wrestler that
even if they were, Sting would still be a great opponent.
Yes. But when I look at a comp, which I do this a lot, and Tyler sometimes he gets a little annoyed at my comps, but this one I feel like will garner a lot of respect and intrigue. There's one wrestler who never quite got to the ability he should have got to, but his mind was beautiful and he was perfect for the business, and that is the one who actually is a producer in WWE now, and that's Abyss. And when I look at Abyss and his work rate, he was so great. And when I look at his matches with Sting and TNA, it leaves me in this spot where I think to myself, wow, Sting versus Bray Wyatt would have been a feud that would have helped erase the stain of those two WrestleMania losses from Cena and Taker. because Sting could take the loss. And if that's what he was doing on his way out, like of WWE, then that's fine. Because ultimately, look, he's working for a brand new company now, and he's undefeated for 4 years. So taking a couple of losses in one company to help push the next crop of talent, I mean, I could see that. And Sting has worked Mike Rotunda. So can you imagine those kind of – can you imagine a mind like Bray Wyatt bringing that up? Like, I need this win for my family. I need this win. You've beaten my father. Like, I've watched Mike Rotunda versus Sting matches in WCW. Just, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out ways to, I guess, help push Bray Wyatt's character, even though, he's been taken from us too early. But when I think of it, that's the feud that I feel like is the one feud that got away. And I'm just so shocked that nobody booked it.
And okay, so here's a guy, right, who, ultimately what we're going to talk about when we talk about him, I think, is missed opportunities. But here's a guy that it didn't matter how many times they dropped the ball with him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, I was at this was after about 3 months after he'd been released from WWE the first time. I was at an AEW Dynamite show here in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, I remember the main event was Cody Rhodes versus Malachi Black, no holds barred, whatever they wanted to call it.
Mm-hmm.
But they had apparently snuck somebody into the building earlier in the day under a sheet, put something over their head so they couldn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
And the speculation around us that it was him, because of his relationship with Cody, it would have made total sense for him to debut that night, make the save kind of thing.
Yeah.
But just everyone was just the excitement was just so palpable, and it ended up that the guy they snuck into the building was Tony Nese. But
so I wanted to point this out because I feel like nobody ever talks about this. I feel like Bray was a victim of circumstances in terms of Vince McMahon values look over character. And please let me elaborate. If you go back and you look at the groups that Bray Wyatt was in as Husky Harris, right? Can you honestly tell me that anybody else in that group, and those two groups besides CM Punk, obviously, that they could have gotten the group over better than Bray or than Husky? Because if you go back to Husky Harris, very first promo in NXT, you can see the genius in his words. You can see him talking. When he is introduced as Husky Harris for the inaugural episode of NXT, his sit-down interview, right? You can tell, this guy's got the gift of gab. He's got it. Right? Do you remember the promo?
Not at all.
Well, you're supposed to do your fucking research. Anyway, so
I wasn't aware we'd be talking about Husky Harris today.
We're talking about we're reflecting on his whole career. There's good parts, there's bright spots in his entire career, not just Bray Wyatt. And, when you look at it, he's positioned to be just the muscle in this group with Wade Barrett and Michael, whatever his name is, Tarver, and Michael McGillicuddy, and what's his other name? Heath Slater. He's far and beyond better on the microphone than any of these guys. And for some reason, he's a background character. He's treated as a background character. And then the second time he's a part of the NXT, now he's in a group with a real leader, a real mic general with CM Punk. And it's still, he's treated as a background character. And I think to myself, what would have happened to his career had somebody back there just been like, you know what? Wade Barrett he's got the look, sure. But this kid right here, why don't we let him be the talker? Why don't we let him be the guy? Because his mind, it seems to me, whenever people talk about him, it's always been this genius. It wasn't something that just came out of nowhere when he created the Bray Wyatt character. So I wonder to myself why
Yeah,
there wasn't somebody that fought for the bigger guys back then.
it could have worked. I'm reminded of something that someone said about a mutual friend of ours who's quite a talker, but to quote Jay-Z, wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight.
Mm-hmm.
I think you know who I'm talking about. But one of his friends, he was getting a little out of hand, and people were ready to go. And one of his friends said, looked at me and another one of our mutual friends who's quite large as well, and said, he does the talking, but we do the walking.
Mm.
And Bray could have been that because his in-ring at that point was not as polished as it would become.
Mm-hmm.
So he could have been the guy who does all the talking, and then the guys with the look could have done the work, even
Agreed.
though they ultimately a lot of them fell flat as well. Because I think in that initial group, who they thought were going to be stars were Barrett, obviously Brian because they brought him back, and probably Skip Sheffield. Well,
we're not
they did though.
We're not gonna talk about that guy.
But they did.
I'm never gonna do that. I'm gonna have to sit that one out. If we ever talk about this specific guy, he's done more harm to professional wrestling than good. So we're just gonna move on. So the Wyatt family is one of the greatest factions. I think people will look at as like they will forever be looked at, especially now. And I made this comment on a TikTok just talking about Bray Wyatt, and I want to run this by you because I don't think you listened to it. I don't think you watched it. I believe Bray Wyatt will be the wrestling version of a Vincent Van Gogh. I believe he will be appreciated more now than when he was here on Earth with us. And if anybody who knows anything about art, or if you've watched any Doctor Who, or if you've, had to deal with social studies or anything like that in your early schooling, you know that Vincent Van Gogh was an artist who no one gave a shit about until he was gone. And now his paintings are considered legendary and they're worth millions of dollars. And that's kind of how I look at Bray. I feel like now people will reflect and they will go back and talk about Bray, and they will have conversations like we've had for the past 40 minutes, just talking about how there were missed opportunities and there wasn't the right people help pushing him forward. And it just makes me really sad to think that, unfortunately, we're at a time and place where what he meant to the business is not going to be replicated. There's nobody that has his mind, that has his, his gift. I know there's a lot of comparisons made between him and Joe Gacy, but it seems like Gacy really doesn't like that comparison. So what do you think?
There are similarities, but it's funny, we're talking, and I even said we're ultimately going to talk about missed opportunities. But we're talking about missed opportunities and all this. Like, when you really go back and look at his career, he was on the main roster for, we'll say, 10 years because he debuted in 2013 SummerSlam.
Mm-hmm.
He is a 3-time world champion.
Yes.
Granted, none of them were, long term.
Mm-hmm.
I guess The Fiend held the title for quite a while.
Yes.
The second time.
Mm-hmm.
But so ultimately he did get that, Academy Award, so to speak. Like, hey, we appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing is, he could have been, the biggest star in the business.
Yes.
And I don't want to bring in the negative here, so I won't, other than to say, because one man who's, for the most part, whose vision is so outdated that he's still living in the 80s, felt that he didn't look like a star.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at his 3 world title reigns, I got to be honest with you. What I look at is, and I don't think I've done this with any other wrestler, and I don't want to be negative on here because this is supposed to be an uplifting pod about Bray, and we're supposed to be reflecting and talking about what could have been. I feel like his world title reigns were inevitably a failure because what people remember about these title reigns are the horrendous losses. How he lost each title.
Yeah.
So let's dissect them real quick. His first title loss comes in less than a month. He wins the title at the Elimination Chamber and loses it at the very next pay-per-view, which winds up being WrestleMania, to Randy Orton, someone who did not need the world title, in the middle of the card. And it shocked everyone. I remember no one thought Randy was winning that match. For sure, people thought Randy's putting over Bray, and Bray's going to come out of WrestleMania. We're going to have tons of feuds with him as world champion. And Randy wins the match and shocks everybody. And we go from Bray to Randy to Jinder Mahal.
Making me mad right now because, yeah, also we can try to pop a market.
Okay. And his second Universal Championship, or his first Universal Championship, he loses to Goldberg at Saudi. And there are so many people angry about that match. The fact that the Fiend lost to Goldberg. So a guy from the 90s who had a 1.5-year stint and has not had a substantial feud, has, as Kurt Angle has talked about before, has been used the wrong way, because Goldberg was a 3-minute match guy. He was the ultimate warrior of this generation. Go out there, squash someone. That's what gets him over.
Right. Watch the match with Brock at Mania. The same one that Bray loses to Randy. It's perfect.
Yes. So then he loses that one. And then, most notably, you point out his long title reign as Universal Champion. Nobody talks about that. You're literally the only person who just brings that up. Because all anybody talks about is that title reign leads to Roman. He loses the title, and Roman starts as Universal Champ. He was the last champion to hold that title before
that reign was only a week. The long one was the one he won it at Saudi in October and lost it in February.
Okay.
He won it in Saudi and lost it in Saudi.
Okay, so then we go to, all right, so we're looking at his 3 title reigns. The way he loses the title has so much more impact on your mind than his title reigns, and that is mind-boggling to me.
Right, and I think the only reason he had the third one was we're sorry, we shouldn't have done this when he lost it to Goldberg.
I suppose maybe they just didn't. Maybe they thought that Braun versus Brock was the moneymaker match, and they just thought this was going to be the future big feud, not realizing that Braun Breaker was very limited. Not Braun Breaker, Braun Strowman. Why did they
finally admitted that?
No, that's never going to happen.
No, actually, I really liked what I've seen from him lately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand what the purpose of him losing the feuds the way he did, or why he lost them. I felt like I want to make this very clear, because we're trying to make a living doing this, that sometimes people in our position will actually hurt wrestling more than help it. And I've realized it with my guys, Bryan Danielson, and I've realized that the internet, along with live audiences, have definitely affected Bryan in the positive by helping prop him up, by helping put him in these positions that he possibly is not in without the backing of people like us. But I feel like we've also done massive harm to someone like Bray Wyatt, because as Tyler points this out, and he refuses to admit, because I think it's one of those things that he just does not agree with in his soul. We have affected the way WWE viewed Bray Wyatt because every time he got to a match to end his feud, right after the match, it was a negative outpour from the internet wrestling community almost immediately. And then Bray was kind of like they just stopped. I've never seen a wrestler in my lifetime where his feud or his push was almost stopped right after a pay-per-view match. He had so many start-stops in wrestling, and I think a lot of it has to do with the negativity of the internet wrestling community.
See, what's frustrating about that is they don't care about it when we like something, generally, on the internet.
Well, I just pointed out, Brian.
But that's more the live crowds, and I don't think the internet had a lot to do with that.
Okay.
Because there's so many people that the internet loves that they just don't do anything. Damian Sandow is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever, in this case, when the internet hates something, it matters. Like, why are we? It either matters what the fans think or it doesn't. It shouldn't be subjective to.
Well,
I think a lot of that is confirmation bias for people like Vince McMahon. See, the fans think he isn't worth a shit too.
Yeah,
if the fans were all about him, they'd be like, "Well, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what you don't know what you want. We know what you want."
Yeah, I think I've pointed this out in the past. I feel like Bray was one of those unique guys who because he was so odd that wrestling treated him as such. And I feel like they were looking for impact in terms of Elimination Chamber, Money in the Bank. They were looking for those type of impacts to be met with his theatricality. They were hoping that his version of professional wrestling would kind of revolutionize the business.
Can you imagine cult leader Bray Wyatt with the briefcase?
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
And guys, I want to really apologize because there's been a lot of negativity on this particular episode that we didn't intend for. I think it's just we're both pounding the table for someone who unfortunately isn't here anymore, and we can't help him.
Yes,
we're still trying.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those. It's one of those things that it just boggles our minds. Yeah. But
they didn't realize what they had.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That's where we're going to end the podcast because we feel like that we've been able to give you some good thoughts. We didn't want to dissect his career like a wrestler spotlight. We wanted to point out some good bright spots, but also talk about things that were missed because they're always going to boggle our mind. And if we don't talk about them, they'll just eat us up inside. And we definitely don't want that. So there was so much more that could have been done, but I will ultimately wrap up. And then Tyler, because I know Bray specifically means something to you, I will let you close the show and say goodbye to our audience. But I just want to say, I mentioned this the other day on a telephone call with Tyler. The more I think about Bray Wyatt, the more I think to myself that he should have been as big as Roman Reigns is. It took Roman 10 years or 9 years to get to this point of Roman Reigns. For years, he was shoved down our throats and he was positioned as the guy, and it just didn't work. Fans would boo at WrestleMania when he was supposed to be a babyface. Like, he got booed at a WrestleMania after 2 main events. Like, that's not something that they wanted. And finally, they allowed him to be this version of a character that is so similar to his real life. You know, the cocky, arrogant, good-looking guy who just knows he runs the shit, you know? But why they and I mean this because I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to like live in the prisoner of the moment, but I just want to make this clear. It was reported by a lot of people that this version of Bray we were supposed to get, this new version when he came back, was supposed to be just Windham. Yeah, it was going to be called Bray Wyatt because that's the name that he made. But he was going to be the closest version to Windham that we were ever going to get. Hence the reason for the last promo, the last big promo he cut. He was going to just be allowed to come back and just be Bray Wyatt, just be Windham Rotunda. And I ultimately feel like that would have catapulted into being the top star in the business. Because the way people react, the way they react now to listen to that promo, the way they reacted to that promo when he cut it, tells you everything you need to know. Go back, guys. I ask you, I beg you, go back and watch that promo. Bray's last big promo in the wrestling ring.
I'm talking about the return promo.
Yes, his nerves, the way he's nervous and he's opening up to the audience. Go back and tell me, come back and tell me without a shadow of a doubt that you believe that would not have been the biggest version of Bray Wyatt we were ever going to get.
Genuine vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah, look, and they ruined it that night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't even know what to say. Like, yeah, I think I would have loved to have seen that. I would have loved to have seen him be able to be himself and show us this beautiful human being that everyone's talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
I love this. And like I said, I love the specific stories that people tell about him and the laugh that everyone mentions, the laugh. Like he was always making people smile and laugh and think and just be. It just sounds like he was just like a big brother for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's heartbreaking that like that's gone. Like I love what Seth said, and I appreciate that he kind of went inside himself to decide, about going to SmackDown, and he said, like, look, I could have gone, but I would have had to leave my family. And I just remember this conversation I had with Windham where he said, go hug on that baby girl. So that's what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish we'd gotten to see the man, this just special human being that everyone talks about, instead of trying to make him a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the original character is so entertaining, I think we could have even gone above and beyond that with, Windham Rotunda.
Agreed.
And I'm just heartbroken that we'll never get to see it. But even more than that, this is a man with 4 children, and a wife and a family, and it's just way too soon, man.
Agreed.
We don't know the reasons. We don't know. It's not for us to say, but it's just heartbreaking.
Agreed. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We just wanted to give you a little bit of insight and pay respects to Windham Rotunda and what he meant to the business, and what we hope that people are able to go back and enjoy his contributions. And thank you so much for joining us, guys.
We're out.